an American city, an ordinary street, a federal officer raises a gun. A 37-year-old mother falls to the ground. Her name is Renee Nicole Good. She is a U.S. citizen. She is dead. This did not happen at the border. It did not happen in secret. It happened in Minneapolis, in public, in front of a nation now holding its breath. What followed was not silence. It was an eruption. From Minneapolis to Asheville, from Cleveland to Boston, from New York to Philadelphia. People poured into the streets in freezing temperatures, on icy roads, peacefully, relentlessly. They were not protesting politics. They were protesting fear. For years, Donald Trump promised something simple. That brutal immigration enforcement would make America safer. That cruelty aimed at some would protect the rest. Renee Good's death shattered that promise. It revealed a darker truth. When power is unleashed without restraint, no one is truly safe. If you want to understand why this moment matters, why it goes far beyond one killing, stay with me. Because the real story begins beneath the surface. What happened in Minneapolis forces a harder question. Not just who pulled the trigger, but what kind of system makes this possible? The administration says this is about immigration enforcement, about law and order, about safety. But listen closely to the pattern. Federal agents patrol local streets. Communities live under constant surveillance. Fear becomes normal. Accountability disappears. After the killing, the response was not restraint. It was escalation. Instead of answers, there were attacks. On the victim, on the press, on anyone asking basic questions, the message was unmistakable. Question authority, and you become the enemy. Even if the dead woman was a citizen, even if she was a mother, this is no longer just an immigration debate. It is a test of power, of how far the federal government can go, and how much the public is expected to accept. When peaceful protesters fill streets across the country, they are not rejecting law. They are rejecting fear imposed from above. To understand why this keeps happening, we have to look backward. Because this crisis did not begin with one shot. To understand this moment, we have to look at the past year. Not decades ago, not ancient history. Just the recent cycle that led us here. Over the past year, Donald Trump made one promise again and again, that a harsh crackdown on immigrants would benefit everyone else. That relentless enforcement would bring safety, order, control. Cruelty was framed as protection. Targeted communities were treated as threats. And federal power was expanded in the name of security. This logic shaped everything that followed. Immigration agents were empowered. Aggressive tactics were normalized. Public fear was dismissed as weakness. At the same time, immigrants were not the only targets. Anyone who questioned the approach was attacked. Journalists, activists, even grieving communities. Demonization became policy. Gaslighting became routine, and accountability slowly faded from view. This is how systems change. Not all at once, but step by step, promise by promise, excuse by excuse. By the time the gun was raised in Minneapolis, the conditions were already in place, and the country was standing on the edge. Then came the moment everything ignited. A single shooting, a single life lost, and suddenly the abstract became real. Renee Nicole Good was killed. A mother, 37 years old, an American citizen. The video spread, questions followed, fear moved faster than answers. In Minneapolis, people did not stay home. They gathered, night after night, even as ICE agents continued to patrol their streets. Across the country, the reaction multiplied. Asheville, Cleveland, Boston, New York, Durham, Louisville, Indianapolis, Philadelphia. Thousands marched, not in rage, but in grief and resolve. And then came the response from power. Not caution, not humility, but defiance. The vice president spent long minutes attacking the victim's character, defending the shooter, blaming the press for asking questions. The Homeland Security Secretary went further, calling the dead woman a domestic terrorist. This was the first true crisis, not just the killing, but what followed. If you're trying to understand how trust collapses, this is the moment to watch closely. Because beneath the noise, a deeper mechanism was taking shape. Look closely at what is happening here. Because the real story is not just violence, it is how violence gets justified. This is the hidden mechanism. Power without accountability. Force without restraint. When a federal officer kills a citizen, the system faces a choice. Pause, investigate, or double down. This administration chose to double down. Instead of calming the nation, it escalated the rhetoric. Instead of protecting trust, it attacked credibility. The victim was redefined, not as a mother, not as a citizen, but as a threat. This is how institutions protect themselves. By shifting blame downward, by framing dissent as danger, by teaching the public to fear questions more than answers. Once that logic takes hold, enforcement stops being about safety. It becomes about dominance. Agents are emboldened, communities are silenced, and oversight quietly disappears. This mechanism does not announce itself. It hides behind words like security and order. But its effect is always the same. Fear spreads, trust collapses, and the distance between the state and the people widens. That is why this story does not slow down here. Because when systems operate this way, another crisis is never far behind. The second crisis did not arrive with a gunshot. It arrived with words. A White House briefing, 35 minutes long, used not to explain, but to attack. The vice president spoke. He defended the shooter. He smeared the dead woman. He scolded the press for asking questions. Then it went further. The video of the killing was reposted, not to inform, but to accuse. The message was clear. If you see innocence, you are lying. If you ask questions, you are dangerous. Soon after, the Homeland Security Secretary added another label: domestic terrorist. No trial, no investigation, just a declaration. This was the second explosion, a moral one. Because when the state labels a dead citizen an enemy, it redraws the line of belonging. Anyone can be next. Anyone can be redefined. At that moment, fear no longer belonged only to immigrants. It spread outward to neighbors, to families, to entire cities. This is how legitimacy erodes. Not suddenly, but publicly on camera. And once people understand that, the question changes. It is no longer about policy. It becomes personal. Now, imagine this as your life, your street, your neighborhood, your city. You watch federal agents patrol where your kids play. You hear sirens, not knowing who they are for. You wonder what happens if a mistake is made, or if a question is asked. You are told this is for your safety, but you feel less safe every day. You see a mother killed, then blamed, then erased, and you understand something quietly. This system does not ask who you are. It asks how useful fear is. When people protest in freezing streets, they are not chasing chaos. They are trying to protect normal life, dignity, belonging. If this can happen to Renee Good, a citizen, a mother, then the line that protects you is thinner than you think. This is the moment to pay attention, to speak, to refuse indifference, because silence is not neutral. It always helps power. If this story resonates with you, don't look away. Share it, talk about it, and stay with me, because what is happening here does not stop at America's borders. What unfolds inside one country rarely stays there, especially when that country sets the tone. When federal power expands without restraint, others watch. Closely, images of peaceful protesters facing armed agents travel fast. So do videos of a mother being killed and then publicly condemned by those in power. Around the world, these moments send a signal about what democracy tolerates, about how dissent is treated, about whether citizenship still offers protection. When leaders defend force instead of questioning it, they normalize a dangerous idea. That security matters more than accountability. That power does not need consent. The consequences ripple outward. Trust in institutions erode. Allies grow uneasy. Critics grow louder. What happens in Minneapolis becomes a reference point, not just for Americans, but for anyone watching how modern states handle fear. This is how domestic crises become global lessons, quietly, relentlessly. And once that line is crossed, the future no longer looks singular. It branches, because from here, there are only a few possible paths forward. From this point, the future splits, not into chaos or calm, but into choices. The first path is reform. Pressure continues. Protests remain peaceful but persistent. Questions, force investigations, restraint slowly returns. In this future, power pulls back. Rhetoric cools. Trust begins cautiously to rebuild. The second path is stagnation. Outrage fades. Attention moves on. The system stays intact. Violence is treated as unfortunate but acceptable. Language hardens. Fear becomes background noise. Nothing improves. Nothing collapses. But the danger remains. The third path is escalation. Force becomes routine. Dissent is framed as threat. Labels replace evidence. In this future, the line between citizen and enemy blurs. The state grows louder. The people grow quieter. History shows us something uncomfortable. Systems rarely choose restraint on their own. They respond only when they must. So the real question is not what leaders will do. It is what societies will tolerate. Because the future is not decided by one shooting. It is decided by what comes after. And that brings us to the final moment. The moment where meaning is assigned. This story ends where responsibility begins. Not in the White House, not with federal agencies, but with awareness. Renee Nicole Good's death is not just a tragedy. It is a warning about what happens when power answers fear with force. When questions are treated as threats, when accountability is replaced by labels, history is clear on this point. Democracies do not disappear overnight. They erode moment by moment, justified each time as necessary. What matters now is not outrage alone. It is memory and choice. You decide whether this becomes another headline or a turning point. You decide whether silence feels safer than truth or whether attention becomes resistance. If this analysis helped you see the system more clearly, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Talk about it. Challenge the narratives that demand obedience without answers. And stay here, because the next chapter of this story is already being written. And it will depend on what people like you do next.